In the mid-1980s, and for several years after, NASA's Space Shuttle was beaming radar signals down toward Earth, the desert of southern Oman, on the edge of the vast Rub al-Khali. In Arabic, Rub al-Khali roughly translates to the empty quarter. And out here, that name felt entirely accurate. Sand in every direction, stretching as far as the eye could see. To outsiders, it looked like a place with almost nothing to mark on a map, or so people thought. When researchers started analyzing the radar data, something unexpected jumped out at them. Scattered across the desert were what appeared to be ancient pathways, old routes worn into the earth long ago, and some of those routes seemed to converge on a single point, a location that had survived only as a faint trace in old texts. That's when filmmaker and amateur archaeologist Nicholas Clapp entered the picture. He spent years cross-referencing NASA's remote sensing data with ancient written sources, and in 1992, that work led to excavations at a site called Shisr in southern Oman. What they uncovered was a fortified structure with a polygonal layout and tower formations. Around it were traces of spice trade networks, and several ancient routes appeared to connect to this very location. Headlines around the world declared that the legendary lost city of Ubar had finally been found. Much of the press framed it as one of the great rediscoveries of the century. The announcement drew global attention, and understandably so. But here's where it gets more complicated, and more honest. Ubar may not have referred to a single city at all. It was more likely a regional name, or the name of a people. Whether this site is the same as the Iram of the Pillars mentioned in the Quran is also not something scholars have generally settled. That connection leans heavily on Clapp's interpretation, and it remains a subject of active debate. What isn't in debate is this. Thousands of years ago, people walked through this desert. A trade-linked site existed in this area. The evidence is real, and that means these legends weren't conjured out of nothing. Now let's step back and look at a bigger picture. We've all heard the standard line about civilization. It starts near rivers. Water brings people together, and cities grow from there. But in the middle of the Sahara Desert, in what is now southern Libya, there was a civilization that turned that assumption completely on its head. The Garamantes. From at least the latter part of the first millennium BCE through several centuries CE, a complex society flourished inside the Sahara, complete with cities, villages, and fortified agricultural land. Herodotus wrote about them using four-horse chariots. The Roman historian Tacitus mentioned them too. And yet, for a long time, the modern world barely knew they existed, because for centuries, the story of the ancient world was written through a Roman lens, and the Garamantes got pushed to the margins. More than 100 fortified farming settlements and traces of multiple towns that had not been fully accounted for before. The Garamantian civilization had been known through classical texts and earlier archaeology, but the sheer scale of what they had built came as a genuine revelation. A settled, urbanized agricultural culture had existed in the middle of a riverless desert. So how did they pull that off? The answer was underground. The Garamantes figured out that water was flowing dozens of meters below the desert surface, and they built a system to bring it up and carry it across the land. In North Africa, these underground channels are sometimes called foggaras. Think of it as a vast network of handmade underground pipes, running beneath the desert floor. Researchers believe this system drew on enormous reserves of what's called fossil groundwater, water that accumulated underground over vast stretches of time. That water fed their fields and kept their pastures alive. The Garamantes traded with the Roman world, clashed with it occasionally, and all the while developed their own distinct Saharan culture across the centuries. There's another story worth telling here. You've probably seen images of Petra, the rose-red city carved into rock in Jordan. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's breathtaking. Built by the Nabataeans from around the 4th century BCE through the 2nd century CE, it sits in an environment that receives barely 100 to 150 millimeters of rainfall a year, barely any water at all. And yet at its peak, the population numbered in the tens of thousands, because before the Nabataeans were sculptors, they were water engineers. They built channels, cisterns, dams, and storage systems designed to capture and manage every drop of seasonal water with extraordinary precision. UNESCO officially recognizes this water management as one of Petra's defining legacies. In the desert, water wasn't just valuable, it was everything. But Petra too eventually faded. In 106 CE, Rome absorbed the Nabataean kingdom. New sea trade routes opened up, and the overland caravan routes that ran through Petra slowly lost their importance. When the economic lifeline was cut, the city began to weaken. Then in 363 CE, a major earthquake caused serious damage to the water infrastructure, and the remaining population drifted away. Now let's take an even bigger step back. Today the Sahara is one of the hottest, most barren places on Earth. But roughly 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, it looked nothing like this. There were grasslands, lakes, rivers. Scholars call this period the African humid period, or the Green Sahara. Across the Sahara today Archaeologists are digging up the bones of hippos, crocodiles, and elephants. Rock carvings of giraffes and buffalo have been found deep in the desert. This isn't imagination. It's a conclusion that geology and archaeology have arrived at together. Then, gradually, things began to shift. A subtle change in Earth's axial tilt, part of a long-term cycle called precession, altered the pattern of African monsoons. Rain became less frequent. Vegetation disappeared. Without plant cover, the land reflected more sunlight, which disrupted atmospheric circulation, which brought even less rain. The whole system began feeding itself in the wrong direction. This didn't happen overnight. It unfolded across thousands of years, at different rates in different regions, and the people who lived through it made a choice. They went underground. The long, desperate, extraordinary negotiation between changing conditions and human survival. So why did these civilizations eventually disappear? The reasons varied. Shifting climate, changing trade routes, political upheaval, outside pressures. But one factor keeps showing up again and again: the limits of the water. The Garamantes had been drawing from their underground reserves for hundreds of years. Water that accumulated over very long timescales was being depleted faster than it could be replenished. As water levels dropped over the centuries, they dug deeper. More labor, more resources, more effort. But the levels kept falling, and eventually, tangled up with other pressures, the society began to lose its footing. The site at Shisr in Oman tells a similar story. Geological surveys revealed that the fortress had been built over a network of underground limestone caves. Over a long period of time, the ground beneath it weakened, and part of the structure collapsed inward. A thriving place had been swallowed by the earth, so they built a story around it. Divine punishment for greed. A curse upon pride. The wrath of the desert king. That's how legends are born. Something was real. Something did disappear, and the memory of it survived for thousands of years in the form of a story. And now we're actually finding the evidence. But let me ask you something. Does any of this feel like a distant, ancient problem? The Ogallala Aquifer stretches beneath the central plains of the United States. The USGS reports that water levels across significant portions of this aquifer have been declining for decades. In many areas, water that accumulated over very long timescales is being drawn down faster than recharge can replace it. How structurally different is that from the Garamantes, digging their channels deeper and deeper until the system finally gave way? It's not an easy question to answer. When Professor Mattingly's team published their findings in 2011, the academic world took notice. The Garamantean civilization had been known before, but the scale of what remote sensing imagery revealed was new. Mattingly argued that Garamantean civilization had long been underestimated because ancient African history was often written through a Rome-centered lens. One discovery didn't just add a footnote to the record. It reframed the entire way we think about ancient African societies. And there's a reason discoveries like this keep happening. Desert environments can be remarkably good at preservation. Low rainfall, reduced oxygen, minimal biological activity. Under the right conditions, traces from thousands of years ago survive almost intact. Some of the best preserved ancient sites on Earth are in the middle of what people call empty wasteland, the land that looked like nothing is. In fact, one of the most patient archives humanity has ever had. Every grain of sand in the Sahara carries a story. It might have been the soil beneath someone's feet when grasslands covered this land. It might be what's left of a stone that once formed the floor of a bustling city square, when radar and remote sensing imagery helped researchers trace ancient route networks across the desert, and archaeologists followed those paths with shovels in hand. It wasn't just a discovery about the past. It was a confirmation that what we assumed was absent had been there all along. Whether Ubar is the exact name for what was found at Shisr, and whether it connects to the Iram of the pillars in the Quran, scholars are still working through that. The debate is ongoing and honest, but what isn't in question is that the stories people passed down for thousands of years weren't made up from nothing. Somewhere underneath the legend, there was something real. Right now, beneath the Sahara, there are sites that haven't been touched yet. Beneath the sand dunes of the Arabian Peninsula, there are places that don't have names in any modern record. Satellites are orbiting the Earth today, reading the land line by line, looking for what the sand is still hiding. The past isn't finished, it's still unfolding beneath our feet. And the desert was never just a place where things were lost. It turns out it was the one place that kept the truth the longest. We're only just beginning to read it.